Sounds good. Okay. Let me make sure.
Good evening.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody. And we'd like to welcome you to the Diamonds in the Rough webinar. My name is Ben Jackson, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. As always, our webinars are brought to you by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and the Kappa Foundation. These are our webinar sponsors for this evening. This evening, we have Mr. Christopher Cobb, who will actually go through an understanding of the difference between going to a 2-year versus 4-year college, and what are those opportunities that you have. Mr. Cobb, you
Yes,
now
sir.
have the com, and
Okay.
we will turn it over to you. Once again, if anybody has any questions, please let us know and put it in the question box, and I will ask the questions. So, Mr. Cobb, all over to you.
Sounds good. Can everyone see my screen at this time?
They can.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Yeah. So good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I've kind of switched my presentation just a little bit. We will discuss 2-year, 4-year colleges and some of the differences there. That those topics are certainly integrated into the presentation, but also I want to kind of share some information with respect to paying for college. Wanted to kind of bring those topics out a little bit more to the forefront. And so we'll proceed in that vein. And as Mr. Jackson has noted, questions will be handled appropriately. So good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. My name is Chris Cobb. I'm a project manager for the Department of Defense, member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, and this is a slide deck presentation on college, paying for college, and with a few other topics kind of intermixed into the slides. So let's see. Okay, so cool. The purpose of this is providing parents with information to allow, and students as well, to prepare for the interest and success in college with an emphasis actually on financial preparation. So what we want to talk about is, what are the different means, what are the different ideas that, folks need to start thinking about as soon as possible, high school, 9th, 10th grade, as to how to pay and what avenues you should consider in order to avoid massive debt, the taking on of massive loans. And so some of my slides delve into where we are with respect to the student loan landscape and how to avoid some of those traps in order to leave school with the least amount of money regarding your undergraduate degree for your child. So that's kind of where I am in life at this point. And, I want to share some of the information also that I've been putting some serious thought into for my 2 teenagers. So again, Chris Cobb, I work for the Department of Defense. I'm a government civilian. I do project management. This is a little bit about my background. Graduate of North Carolina A&T. Work mostly doing software related project management at this time, and I've worked in industry in the past. Was at Microsoft as an intern and a co-op, and I worked for a number of years for Northrop Grumman and a few other smaller places. And I've been with the federal government for about 9 years, coming up on 9 years. So that's a little bit about my background there. Okay, so jumping right into it, one thing that's aware, folks need to be aware of, and that's prevalent, and this is a discussion point, is, we're seeing a widening wealth gap out there. Okay, and this chart kind of gives a little bit of a purview as to just where we are. Okay, so we have to start thinking about how to not necessarily accumulating wealth for the sake of doing so, but for paying for things without using credit and and just what wealth means to a family and a legacy. So, some of that has been forefront when you look at the recent government shutdown. A lot of folks weren't getting paid, and that caused panic in families because there was no savings. And a lot of folks families had children in college or elderly parents, etc. Focusing on wealth kind of towards the front end of your days pays off later, because inevitably things come up for all of us. Car repairs, the house needs a new roof, etc. So, I mean, those things, college ties into those, but it's also a broader topic of discussion. The fact that, there is a wealth gap out there, and we're going to look at some of the reasons as to how that's come about. Continuing on, some of the contributors to that, the main contributor generally has been years of home ownership, because, as you know, owning a home has tax implications that, you just don't receive if you're renting. You're not able to write off any interest, mortgage interest, for instance, because you're not paying interest if you're renting. There are a number of things associated with home ownership that allow you to deduct and keep your income at a lower level, because you're able to deduct mortgage interest and claim other deductions with respect to your home. So this is one of the chief ways of accumulating, that families have accumulated wealth over many decades. But as we go down, you can, and then household income. What ultimately is interesting about this slide is what ultimately contributes to, in many cases, these numbers that we're seeing at the top is related back to college education, because the more education you have, generally speaking, the better your job in terms of income. Higher your job, higher income, the number of opportunities available. So college plays a big part, and has historically played a big part, a large part, into your wealth accumulation in terms of access to capital and access to wealth. That's kind of one of the takeaways here. I'll build this out a little bit more as time goes on, the slide. But when I looked at these bar charts, I said to myself, wow, it's very hard to own a home in a lot of different cities if you're not working the type of job that warrants the income. I mean, if you think about the Washington, D.C. area, or New York or Chicago, particularly the major cities in the country, it's hard to exist in those cities these days without an education, without a college education. It's not like 30, 40, 50 years ago when our parents, my parents lived in New York and they were able to carve out a good living. It's much more difficult now. And it all points back, in many cases, to the haves and the have-nots. And education is a big factor, so we have to take it seriously, And I challenge our young men and women to take their education seriously, and to go out and get those degrees, despite this mass movement of, you don't need college. Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, Bill Gates. I mean, those guys, Larry Ellison of Oracle. I mean, these are anomalies. These guys are billionaires, but it doesn't work like that for the bulk of the people out there. So just want everybody to kind of keep that in, and we can talk about it if you have any questions about it, but as an idea. So moving over to some of the economic benefits, as you can see from this chart, I mean, it's pretty evident that, again, as I was saying earlier, generally speaking, in not all cases, because, I haven't factored in the trades as a part of this discussion necessarily, but even the trades are considered education, by the way. But generally speaking, the more education you have, the more money you're going to make. And that's just a fact at this point. This slide was around 2015 timeframes. Data is fairly current, but the average income, or the median, which is the middle, actually, for full-time year-round workers at the bachelor's level is around $67,000. And there are a lot of people that don't make $67,000 a year, even with a bachelor's degree. So, again, without it, it's even obviously less people making that level of money. So the bottom line to this is that, getting that college degree is really worth your time, your effort, the challenge, all of the above. And I can say personally that I've been very blessed economically, opportunities that I certain I wouldn't have had I not had my undergraduate degree. So that's kind of what I want to say, take away on this slide. So delving into the cost of these institutions. So we live in the Northern Virginia, DC area, DMV, DC Metro, DC, Maryland, Virginia, DC Metro area. So I just took this as a kind of an average of schools in our area, but you can apply it to wherever you are out there, and just plug the numbers in. But for this area, I plugged in for 2-year institutions, something called NOVA, which is Northern Virginia Community College. Again, you can try wherever you live, you can go on the web and research what the community college, the cost, the tuition fees, etc., and get all the same data. But this is just a snapshot as to generally how this works in terms of money. Okay, so the public 2-year college is really a great bargain, and I'll talk about that a little bit more down the line. But at Nova today in our area is around $5,000 a year, and so and books and supplies. So that's just the tuition. There is no room and board with the community college. They don't have dormitories, and they don't feed people on a meal plan, generally speaking. Some do. Some community colleges are becoming more sophisticated such that they do that, but for the most part, they don't. So just, again, these numbers are not hard, but they're general numbers. You have to drive back and forth to campus. Of course, you're going to have books and supplies. So you're talking about a total of around $7,300 average for a full year. So that means 2 years of community college will cost you maybe $15,000 or $16,000, which for most state universities, and certainly none of the private universities, are going to be that cheap in terms of attending for a full year. So as we move down to a public 4-year, again, this is an average for our area, the DC Metro area, Northern Virginia. We have our most prominent university here, largest university pretty much in the immediate area for Northern Virginia would be George Mason University, okay? And George Mason costs around $10,000, the tuition is around $10,952 a year, okay? And if you factor in room and board for your, staying on campus and your meal plan, if you do that, as well as your books and, whatever transportation, and that might include your cell phone or whatever else in that amount of money. And you can take away some money, you might have to use some for other areas, but it's looking to be for a full year at George Mason, 1 year, around $27,000. Okay. So again, wherever you are out there, University of Kansas, University of Connecticut, any of the state universities anyway, that's probably in the realm. You can, North Carolina, I used to live there. The state university system is less expensive. But it's probably averaging around 20,000 versus closer to 30 for Northern Virginia. But again, play with the numbers in your given area and have those crucial conversations. Out of state, which I'm not an advocate for, quite frankly, because you're paying close to double for the same education. So I don't see the relative value in doing that. So I'm not a fan of out of state. Some folks say, hey, I want to send my kid wherever they want to go. And I totally respect that. I mean, that's the family decision. I have nothing to do with it. It's just, I don't see the point in paying nearly double to go to a different state and all of the expenses that are incurred with doing that. Now there's some cases where you have, you have scholarship money, or you have money that makes it a little bit more even so that it's closer to your own state university. And that makes sense. I mean, that's fine. And that's understandable. But I mean, if you're in a situation where you're having to pay nearly the full amount via loans or whatever you have, even scholarships, whatever, it's just an added expense that's unnecessary to go out of state. It's just, in my opinion, it's just an unnecessary expense. And as you can see, using the same numbers for George Mason, and I should have put that in parentheses under there, I'll make an update to the deck, but that public 4-year out of state is a George Mason. These are the figures used for that. And as you can see, we're talking around $47,000 because the tuition has gone up because you're coming from a different state. Now, the other expenses may be relatively the same. They may not be. They may be higher. Depending on where you're coming from, your transport could be higher, right? And other expenses could be more because you're not close to home, or you're a couple states away. That could end up being flights. That could end up, being long drives to a different place. Got to have a good car to do that, and insurance and the whole. So, it's just something to think about. And then your private. And I say nonprofit here because this factors out your for-profit universities, such as University of Phoenix and some of the other ones. But your private schools are even more expensive, in tuition. Okay, so many of those schools. I have a friend whose son attended is a freshman at LaSalle University, which is private in Pennsylvania, and they're paying around the total cost is around $60,000. Actually a little north of that. And many private schools are well above that amount. You can check your state, but some of the more prominent private schools are in the 70s. And if you take a look at Duke University, it's around the mid 70s. Of course, very difficult to get into. But the bottom line is that the private schools are even more expensive. Now, what I will say is that do your research as a family on private schools, private universities, because in many cases, they make an attractive package for those that, particularly if you don't have the income, or they want minorities on a given campus. Case in point, here in Virginia, my son has been getting several emails. He's a sophomore in high school. He's been getting emails from a school called Bridgewater. Bridgewater, I looked up, is around $60,000 a year. But, with the emails that he's getting, and if he can offset that, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, with some athletics, with keeping his academics up, Bridgewater might end up costing us less than a state university that may not give some of that money for the same reasons. So, he's a minority going to Bridgewater. This is just a hypothetical scenario. Their minority population there is probably 3 or 4% for African Americans, if that. And many schools out there are willing to pay for that. I'm just going to be frank about it. They're willing to pay to increase their minority presence and graduation rates on their campuses. So, again, don't write off the private universities thinking that, that's out of your reach. You never know. There could be things that they give money for that you never even thought about. I mean, if your son runs track, a daughter is cheerleader, and they want to increase the diversity. Someone coming in, daughter may want to major in chemistry or biology. I don't know. But there's so many different reasons that, it's worth exploring the private universities. I know in the past I've said I'm staying away from them, but now I'm seeing that, they're very, they make, depending on your situation, can make a package very attractive. So I'm definitely not taking the private universities off the table. I will if it comes up to being a larger amount that I'm comfortable with dealing with, but until then, I'm not. The main takeaway here, if you look at the bottom call out block, is that, George Mason out of state, if you notice, is 76.8% higher than for Virginia residents. So again, that $10,000 for tuition versus $31,000 for the same degree, the same experience. I just don't, I don't see the point in that. And I certainly wouldn't be an advocate for it, only unless there was money coming from something else to offset what I would have to pay in state. So just want to take note here, take a a minute out to give everyone a perspective on how the costs are rising for these universities and colleges. And this is kind of tragic, but you know, it makes a strong case for what I'll say later that I'm applying to for my own kids and to my own kids. But as you can see here on this top graph, the Consumer Price Index, since 1990, if you look at the green line, the slope and the upward trend of that line is so much higher and so much faster rising than housing and energy and healthcare. Even those things are not as fast rising and have not been for the past 30 years as tuition and fees. So that's something to think about, because it changes the discussion and how folks are making decisions. And by that, I mean, I'm running into a lot of people that are starting their careers out at the two-year colleges, okay? To get the basics out of the way. Yeah, you know, hey, you don't get that experience, right? You don't get that live in that dorm and going to the football game on Saturday night and going into the cafeteria. Those things I loved. I mean, I had a ball in undergrad. I didn't have a ball. I studied a lot. I was always busy, but I had a very good time and a full experience, and you know, it was worth it. It was a blessing. But that blessing costs a heck of a lot more now than it did 30 years ago for me, because I've been out of undergrad for 25 years this year. So it's something to think about. The second chart indicates how the different types of institutions have increased in price. And as you can see here, the tuition in private institutions has risen exponentially faster than public institutions. But again, I say, and I challenge everyone out there, don't write the private schools off. In many cases, they are looking for minorities. They're looking for people who have special talents. They have money in their endowment funds and are flexible on how they use that money, a lot more so on average than public universities. So public universities cost less, but in many cases, private institutions are able to put together an attractive package because they have control over that money, and there are less people going to private institutions than public. You know, as a quick example, George Mason has about 30,000 students. Bridgewater, which I mentioned earlier, as the private college that has emailed us about my son, has about 5,000, maybe 4,000 to 5,000 students. So they have money to work with in their endowments and their funds, and they can put together a package and have more flexibility over those dollars versus trying to deal with so many students who are in need of money at the public universities. And I dare say that on average, private universities are going to give more scholarship money than public universities on average, just simply due to the math and the numbers. I mean, for you to get a decent scholarship at a large public university, you have got to be a stellar student. You have to stand out above and beyond the kid that, you know, just got into that university because, you know, right at the SAT and right at the GPA they needed. You need to be the person that could have gotten into a Duke or a Yale or something like that. Present that data to a private university wherever, a public university wherever you are, then you might be in better footing to receive more money from a public. But public universities, from my experience, don't give as much money as private universities do for a multitude of reasons, largely due to the number of students that they're having to entertain. So hold all your questions. Please write them down, and we can discuss after the slides, the brief. Just wanted to give a little background here on borrowing. You know, last year I had slides on the different types of loans. I challenge you to go out to the internet and research the types of loans that are out there. They're pervasive. Guaranteed student loan, you know, personal loans, college low interest loans that you can get. I didn't really want to focus on that because that information is pretty readily available on the internet. But I wanted to talk about some things to get folks thinking about, down the line, what debt means and why, considering the 2-year colleges is a very good idea. Most kids don't like it and they don't want to stay at home and they don't see the point. But if you fast forward a few years and you actually have that degree, but you don't have what you see on this chart here, and that's these monthly payments, you feel a lot better about that. So if you look here at the bachelor's degree on the block on the top, well, let's start with the all students. So what this is saying is that out of all students, the average amount of debt, student loan debt, cumulatively is around 23K. This is about 6 or 7 years old. So it's probably a little higher than that now. In 2012, what that meant, and there's a delta, by the way, of $54 between 2004 and 2012. All points back to the rise in tuition and the rise in the cost of all this stuff. But you'll see that $245 a month is, kind of what you would have to factor into your other bills that you already have. Go over to bachelor's degree. Students are taking out, or were around the 2011, 2012 mark, around $30,000 for the total of their bachelor's degree. And I think that's a pretty liberal figure. I mean, I know people who have had a lot more debt than that, depending on where they went to school. But even at around $29,000, $30,000, you're paying $312 a month for your loans. So as an average. So that's a pretty nice amount of money on top of your rent and your phone bill and your car payment and your car insurance and your food and your clothing and your entertainment, all the things that comprise a budget. You got this loan payment. And again, that's a pretty liberal figure. I mean, $312 is a nice amount of money, but it can be much higher than that. And in many cases, it's going to be higher than that, depending on your family and how much money they've had to foot for your college education. Are they able to contribute anything? Have folks saved in 529 programs and other types of programs? So these are just averages, right? But generally speaking, these are going to be on the child when you finish your degree. As a use case, when I graduated from college, all the debt that I had was on me because my parents were divorced and my dad, and they couldn't afford it, and so I had to take out loans. Thankfully, the public universities were cheap back then. I left undergrad with $7,000 in debt, and I was able to pay it off pretty quick. But those days are gone. So you really have to think through where you go and what that means down the line. So this chart is just giving you a general feel for how your bills would, be set up with you having debt after taking out those loans. Some parents say, hey, I got this. I'm going to pay your loan off. But there are a lot of parents that are not in a position to say, hey, you went to University of Florida. I got your loan debt. Going out, you get you a job and you start out fresh. I mean, there are a lot, particularly in our community, no disrespect. But in our community, generally speaking, a lot of us have not put aside money for college for multiple kids or even one kid. It's tragic. It's unfortunate. I'm not preaching because I can tell you right now, I hadn't put aside enough myself. We're putting some aside, but certainly not enough, especially considering what these places cost these days. So, and again, going back, average debt. So if you were to take that up per year, looking back, as you can see, in 5 years, we've gone up around $10,000. And if you go back, this is showing $30,000 at $312 a month as an average. What is $37,000? I'm going to predict that's around north of $400 a month if you leave college owing $37,000, which isn't that much money over 4 years. But if you do leave owing that much, then I'm going to say that your payment is going to be upwards of $400 plus for your loans. This is why it's so important to think about bugging mom and dad about that University of Florida, or that, the fact that you just saw, um, Syracuse, or who's been balling this year, Kentucky, uh, University of Central Florida, and you live in North Carolina or Maryland. I really don't think it's a good idea. I don't think you should press, because I mean, you could end up with a major bill down the line that you didn't think about. And now all of a sudden your mom says, hey, you wanted to go there. We did our best to make it happen. But now this $80,000 debt is on you. So, I'm not, these are family decisions, and everybody has to work through this stuff. But $37,000 is the average debt coming out of undergrad in across the country in 2016, and here we are in 2019. So this is probably even 40. And if you notice a pattern or a trend here, these places are going up about 3 or 4% every year. So, as you can see, the numbers are getting higher every year because these places are getting more expensive, all colleges, public and private, each year, as we saw on a previous slide. So another slide, one last one I think that I've included on that is to think about in context is all of the things that I'm saying, a lot of people may or may not have thought about in depth, and has led to some decisions that has driven a student loan debt in our country of $1.52 trillion. So this is why I'm an advocate of your 2-year colleges, because my goal for a people is, and I don't care who you are, what race, it doesn't matter. My goal is to see you graduate from college, number one, and number two, with as minimal debt as possible. And this is why I'm a huge fan of going to a 2-year first, getting your calculus, getting your general biology and English out of the way at a 2-year school first, especially if you don't have scholarship money and you don't play sports and you don't have any other money coming in, and your folks make a certain amount and the school won't give you any money, and you have to pay nearly the full amount via a loan. I think you need to rethink that. And I think if you don't, you're going to be contributing to what you see on this slide here, that 1.52 trillion. And for each person, that's going to mean around 37K, and that's in 2016. By the time some of our folks go to school, it may be upwards of 2021, 22, 2023, and that number is going to be nearly $50,000 as an average. And that means you're going to be paying between $500 and $600 per month. And again, those figures are kind of liberal, because a lot of students owe. It's nothing for me to walk around and talk to kids who owe $70,000, $80,000. They decided they were able to get into NYU. Nobody challenged them as to why you need to go to NYU. What the heck is that degree going to do above and beyond somebody going to VCU, okay, which is public. NYU in New York, in Manhattan, I've been on campus at NYU. It's private. It's beautiful, but it's exorbitantly expensive. But if a kid gets in and they challenge their parents and there's not a good comeback and they decide to go to NYU and they graduate, and it costs $70,000 a year, not to mention what it costs to live in New York, and this is just a case study off the top of my head, no one challenged that for them. They looked at it as, hey, I'm going to NYU, my degree is going to, well, you're in for an awakening, because I'm going to tell you right now, your bachelor's degree isn't going to mean a heck of a lot more than anybody who went somewhere else, maybe ODU, which is Old Dominion University, or University of Connecticut, or any state university. It's not going to mean very much above and beyond that, yet your debt is going to be higher than that. So, again, these are family decisions. I'm just putting it out like as I think about it. I love questions and I love to be challenged on this. I just wanted to present this information. So my recommendations are, start talking to your counselors, and I would say do that between 9th and 10th grade to start identifying some things, and being real about where your grade GPA is. Where's your grade point average? Okay. because quite frankly, if your grade point average is lower than a 3.0, and because you haven't been working hard, then that should be a conversation if you're even ready for a university. Now, there are universities that you can get into, but does it make sense to spend that money? Because when you go to those places and you don't have that work ethic, I question whether or not you're going to be able to stay. So you got to think through these things. Maybe a community college is for 2 years just to see where you are, where your head's at, is a good idea first. And it'll be less risk because it's going to be a lot less expensive to go there. You go there, knock it out. This is what happened to my nephew. He got into VCU. We knew his grades weren't good. I mean, they got him into VCU, but his work ethic was terrible. Why would you take out $25,000 in student loan, and this guy isn't really proving himself in high school, that he's working like a dog on the academics as well as shooting basketballs and throwing footballs? Should be working like a dog in the classroom. That would mean more money. So yeah, he started at the community college, took it very seriously, and then, transferred to VCU. He's graduating in May in interior design. So just a little quick case study, but start searching the internet and talking to folks, and looking up scholarships, spend that time now, during factor the time in to look for these things. And I have some slides coming up as to the right websites and apps that are out there. All of us are going to have to fill out this free application for federal student aid, because they have to see where your money is in the household. So, just got to start working on that. But that's the baseline application document that you have to fill out. Everybody has to fill that. It's going to have to fill that out for college. But, it's critical to be honest on that and fill it out so that, you never know. You may be eligible for a grant or something that you weren't aware of, a scholarship, whatever. And last, apply for as many scholarships as possible. It sounds corny. It sounds boring. It sounds laborious. But I just met someone today at work who received $1 million in scholarship money. And she went to Purdue University and didn't pay a dime to finish her 4-year degree. So it does pay off. Talking about grants, just a little briefly, a little bit about these. I won't read this to you, but they're both federal and state grants. Some folks are eligible for a Pell Grant. I was, because my family didn't have any money, and a Pell Grant is, for lower income. And so I was able to receive a federal grant called a Pell Grant. A lot of folks will not be eligible for that, but there are other grants out there. Highly recommend looking at grants because you don't have to repay them. It's not like a loan. So a grant is just basically free money. So get on the internet, get on the apps, and start searching for grants as well as scholarships. But you don't have to repay grants back. So that's a good thing. I got a Pell Grant every year I was in undergrad, and it's generally not based on your grades in undergrad. There are also state grants out there, and because a lot of states do want you to stay in state. You've paid taxes in that state. And those taxes have helped offset the public university system. That's why it's less in tuition, because of the tax base. Part of your state taxes go to the university system, and so it's not as much as it was, and that's why that price has increased. But there is still money going to the state university system in that to help offset the total cost for in-state residents. And there are state grants, as this second bullet indicates. Also, look at the bottom. I looked up this information. I got this information from this website called studentdebrelief.us, and they actually have us looking there on that site, and I'm going to get my kids to apply for this, but they actually have a $2,000 annual scholarship. I haven't really studied the criteria in depth, but I'm, very interested. It's just something to apply for. You never know. So go to this website that you see here, write it down, do whatever you have to do, see what the criteria for that $2,000 scholarship is, and hey, apply for it. You have nothing to lose. Briefly, athletic scholarships. My son runs track and he plays golf. My daughter's a cheerleader. She's gotten into rugby a little bit, and probably will end up running track. I don't know if all that will lead to a scholarship, but hey, my goal is to take advantage of everything. So if you're an athlete, a scholarship might be in your future. Going back to what I said earlier, my good friend from undergrad, his son is at LaSalle. His son went to LaSalle on a baseball scholarship. So his family had to pay $17,000 cash, which isn't bad for them, and they're paying that. Because especially considering that the school is over $60,000 a year. So, but what's helping their financial situation is the fact that he uh, was able to secure a baseball scholarship. So stay on top of your grades, because these athletic scholarships in many cases are based on grades as well. It's not just somebody who's getting by and can shoot some ball or run track, but it's for a student athlete, meaning a student. Someone, don't leave that part of it out. Someone who cares about their grades, someone who protects their grade point average so that they can receive the maximum amount of money out there. Okay, cool. And the military, this is something that many of us leave off the table. I didn't go into the military. I have the high respect for it. I have two brothers who retired from one the Army, the other United States Air Force. If I had to do it over again, this would be my route, because at my age now, I'd be retiring, and I would have gone into the Air Force. But I challenge everyone to look at, and please don't think and say, "Oh God, you're going to be in war." We have to think broader than that. I recommend studying and talking to folks who've been in the military. I work for the Department of Defense. Everybody who sits around me, practically everybody, I would say 80% of the people that are in my space have been in the Army or the Air Force or the Navy. I can count the people, even with all the wars that we've had. They're going back to their Saudi Arabia and the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, who've actually been to war. I can count the people, particularly the college grads, because you have two sides of this. You have what you call enlisted, when you go enlist out of high school, and you also have what you call an officer who does ROTC, and you're commissioned an officer when you finish your degree. And I recommend studying and figuring out, hey, what type of benefits the military has, because I tell you, they're doing everything in the military: computer science, robotics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, medicine, nursing. They're doing everything in the military these days, and they will pay for folks who are smart and have good grades to come in and get paid and see the world and do some of these things, and your degree will be free in many cases, or close to free. And just to give you a quick case study on this, my next door neighbor, who's now moved on, but their family didn't know about the Army or the military. I started talking about it. Young man secured a 90% scholarship to Christopher Newport University. So, highly recommend, and certainly worth pursuing. Here's some of the best scholarship sites out there. Scholarships.com. I recommend going and really spending some time on these sites and registering and applying for scholarships. The Fast Web is where the young lady told me today that she was able to get that $1 million over time. This wasn't a one-time sitting. She was always at the computer, always working with her high school guidance counselor, and she was able to secure $1 million. A lot of work went into it, but she told me that she used Fast Web. So, but these are the top sites, some of the top sites out there. And as you can see, scholarships.com is, they have a lot of scholarships. 2.7 million. They have $19 billion out there. So, it's worth the investment and worth the time to put up a profile, start applying for some things, and seeing where that sits, as well as the grants that I talked about earlier. Because the whole idea, again, is to leave college with the least amount of debt as possible. And you can do that by doing the things that I'm saying now and offsetting those costs, so that the loan that you take out is minimal compared to having to take out a loan for the entire amount of these colleges and universities. So something to think about. We're definitely going to put our time into this around my house. So, and there's some apps out there. Scholly was developed by a young man, a young student who is I believe computer science or engineering at Drexel University. It's very intuitive. I have it on my phone. They automatically send you scholarships. As a matter of fact, all of these sites do. Once you fill out a profile, these apps, they send you what you're eligible for. So there's no excuse today. I mean, a lot of the internet is doing the work for you in a lot of cases. If you're eligible for it, you can apply for it and see what the decision is. But use the technology to help you secure the money. I'm making my kids put Scholly on their phones so that they can have and start to receive scholarships automatically. So just as an idea. Got a couple more slides here. So going into the last part of the presentation here now. Tips to cut down, again, consider that community college. Everything's less expensive. They don't have the overhead of these, some of the expensive PhD level professors from Stanford and Duke. And, the beauty is that most states now have a agreement with the universities of that state to transfer automatically. Back in my time, I'm an older guy now, but back in my era, the community colleges were harder to transfer from to a public university because the credits at a community college back in that era were on a different system. They weren't on a semester. They were on what they call a quarter. So that made it harder to transfer, number one. And number two, they didn't have the agreements in place as they do today. Now, and I'm sure every state has this, but if you go on to Northern Virginia Community College's website, there are literally signed agreements with our state universities, a good deal of them, Old Dominion, James Madison, and you can actually take a look at the signature of the president of that university. Says, if you meet these criteria, which is usually a 2.5 or a 3.0, you will automatically be accepted to that institution. So there's no questions, you will be accepted. Now that doesn't always mean that they're going to accept all of your credits. So you may end up not coming in as a sophomore. I've seen that in some cases. The bottom line is that you will get in. And secondly, I want to say about that is this is how a lot of folks have gotten into their dream school when they couldn't get in out of high school. Okay, because now it's not going to be about the SAT. It's going to be about how well you've done at the community college. So I've known young people to get into Virginia Tech and UVA that they never would have gotten in out of high school, but they were able to go there first and to the community college, do very well, take advantage of the agreement because they got the GPA, met the GPA requirement, and end up going to the top universities in our state. This is something, number two, I had to do. I found a part-time job. I worked selling books, and I also flipped pizzas, as it says here. I did that. I generally always had a part-time job in college, and it was very hard. But, looking back, I think it was worth it because, it forces time management. So time that I didn't work, I was studying and vice versa. So, it really forces. But if you do some of the things mentioned in the previous slides, you may not have to do that. There's also work study at universities. But if you take advantage of the scholarships and really spend your time researching as well as looking for grants, you may not have to work because it's ideal not to have to so you can put more time into your studies. So this is why it's key. And living at home is less expensive. The room at the university is where you stay in the dorm, and the board is the food, room and board. So those things cost a lot of money, and you take those monies off the table, or you're able to save those when you live at home. So, if it's an option, or if your parents are open to that while you're in college, most are, it's another way to consider. I've known some folks to go to George Mason for a year on campus, then move back home for the rest of a couple more years before they get their degree. Why? They're saving probably $15,000 by doing that and just having to pay the tuition and the books, but they're not having to pay the room and the board because now they live back at home. So summary, the whole idea is to avoid becoming a part of those student loan statistics. Do the research, take the time to figure out what works for your family, and you can apply for scholarships, apply for federal and state grants. Um, Consider the community college. You know your work ethic as young people. You know that, okay, yeah, it's good that you got in the University of Florida, but are you going to really do what it takes to do well there? Only you can answer that. Um, Generally speaking, your high school transcript gives some type of insight into that. But the bottom line is that, you have to do this. You have to be serious about it. You've got to have the discipline to go to class and do these things. And you don't want to end up with the numbers that I showed earlier in terms of the debt. That should be your number one charge. How can I do this without walking out with a degree that costs so much that now I have 70,000? And I know people. This is why it's so passionate, because I know people, and it takes a long time. And I won't even to pay that off. And I won't even get into, many people needing graduate degrees these days, because now that costs an extra amount. And where's that money going to come from? And if you get a master's, or you need a master's, or you need more education than just your bachelor's, that has to be thought about and paid for. So, I mean, I met someone one time at work, and the guy told me his sister owed $450,000. And this was because she went to medical school at University of Southern California, which is private. And I thought I dreamed it, to be honest with you. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but I actually thought I dreamed it. I saw this guy about a year or two later, maybe a couple years later. And I said, hey, did you tell me? And I said, I thought that this amount was so exorbitant that I must have dreamed it. I said, but did you tell me your sister owed 450? He says, yeah, I told you that she owed 450. She went to medical school for 4 years at University of Southern Cal, and she had done 4 years at a private. So my goal is you think about how long it would take to pay that off, if you ever can pay it off. I know she was a doctor, but $450,000, now that's exorbitant. But it's relative, because again, if you come out making $60,000 for an undergrad degree, and you get a job paying you $60,000, but yet you owe $40,000 in debt or more, then it's relative. You're still going to have a big chunk of your check after taxes going into paying for your student loan debt. So, and on top of your other bills. So this is why this is such a passionate thing for me. Want to have people avoid that.
Mhm. You know, Brother Cobb, we're almost out of time.
Okay.
This has been very enlightening, and I'm pretty sure that everybody has gotten a good look at this. One of the questions that did come in is, how do we make sure we're prepared for this? What are some of those things that we need to do to make sure that we're prepared to get ready for paying for college? And I
Right.
think you touched on some of it with
Yeah.
the apps and scholarships and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, I did. I think, it's hard. I'm going to be frank about it. It's hard. I mean, but I think, as financial planners and such have told me, doing something is better than nothing. And what I mean by that is there are programs out there, 529 programs. I highly recommend looking at. We have two of those. We have one for each of our kids. And if somebody decides not to go to college, like say, for instance, my son decided, hey, Dad, I'm going in the military, I can take the money that we've saved for him and push it to my daughter. So my number one recommendation is getting started on this as early as possible. And I'll use myself and my wife as a case. I wish I would have started earlier, okay? Because they have a program in Virginia, and most states have a program that if you pay what's called prepaid tuition. So if I would have had $20,000, I could have paid for 4 years of a state university, but I didn't have it. And the monthly payment on that was about $700 a month for a few years. But if you really think about it, it's kind of worth it, because for $20,000 at the time when my kids were born, they'd be paid off now, and they'd have 4-year educations waiting for them, and it had already been paid off in the past. So to get prepared, I recommend doing your research, starting early with saving. If you don't have any savings, don't panic. Realize that you can start at a community college for 2 years. Realize that if you really want to do the loans, they are available. Um, and just think about having your son or daughter maximize their grades so that they can get whatever's coming to them for free. So those would be my formula for that.
Good. If the school you're going to get is an associate degree,
Mm-hmm.
do you think it still would be better to go to a 2-year college?
Well, I'm assuming that someone is saying that because there are 4-year colleges, that offer associate degrees. So, but generally speaking, those schools are overall more expensive than a community college. For instance, that I believe, and I don't know if they still offer it, but at some point, Hampton University offered an associate's degree. But attending Hampton for that associate's degree was a lot more expensive than going to a local community college for the same degree. So my advice would be go to the community if you're interested in an associate's degree to start things out. Go to a community college because that's going to be the least expensive way to obtain that.
This has been good advice. We want to thank you for this advice this evening.
Mhm.
Uh, so one of the things that I'm going to let everybody know is that if you have the opportunity to get into Naviance, please get into Naviance.
Mhm.
Naviance lets you do some of the research on your colleges. It also gives you access to some of the scholarships that are out there. Um, it gives you access to fast web and things of that nature. Just please make sure that while you're doing this research, that you keep an open mind. Um, as Mr. Cobb has stated, you might really want to consider going to a 2-year college, just to get your grades up, just to get to a better point, just to get yourself ready for the college living. And it also affords you the opportunity to prepare for some better scholarships. So once again, we want to thank you guys um, for attending our webinar. Um, Next time, I might have to schedule him for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, because there's a lot of useful information. Once again, this has been recorded, so you can come back and rewatch the webinar. But we also want to thank our sponsors. Once again, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and the Kappa Foundation. This has been a Diamonds in the Rough webinar. And if you need to learn more information about our webinars, please be on the lookout. Most of this information does come to you through Naviance and your Kappa League program. So we thank you again. Please contact me at bjackson01kappa@gmail.com or through Naviance. We thank you for attending and have a good day.
Thank you.